You never expect to find out your mother turned 60 from an Instagram story, but that's exactly how Tessa Hawthorne learned about the party of the year and the fact that she'd been the only one left out. She had just settled into a corner booth at her favorite cafe in Seattle, a rainy Tuesday afternoon, sipping a lavender latte with a book open in front of her but untouched. When her phone buzzed, she checked it out of reflex. That's when the images started rolling in. Her cousin Bella's story first, a slow pan across a lavishly decorated banquet hall. Chandeliers, violins, champagne flutes raised in a cheer. Then Aunt Marilyn's post, a group shot of over 30 relatives, all smiling, arms wrapped around each other with the caption, "Happy 60th to our queen, Margaret. What a night." Margaret Hawthorne, her mother. Tessa blinked at the screen, stunned. Was it old? No, the timestamp said last night. She scrolled. There were dozens more. Her sister Claire was there, laughing beside their mother. Her father, tuxedoed and grinning. Distant cousins from Canada. Neighbors from the street she grew up on. Even Margaret's hairdresser, for God's sake. Everyone. Everyone but her. No missed calls, no texts, no email invitation, not even a polite afterthought. She refreshed the app like that might change something. Like maybe a message would suddenly appear. "Wish you could have been here, Tess." But it didn't come. She called her father first. Her hands were shaking. He answered on the second ring, voice calm, familiar. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hi, Dad. She tried to keep her voice level. Was there some kind of party last night?" A pause. "Oh," he said, with a tone as casual as if she'd asked about the weather. Yes, just a little dinner for your mom. Small circle." Small circle? There were over 50 people in those photos. "I wasn't invited," she said, her voice almost too quiet to hear. Another pause, then, "Well, we thought you wouldn't come anyway. It's a long trip. You're always so busy." Busy? He knew she worked remote now, knew she hadn't traveled in months. "You didn't even ask," she said. "You decided for me." Her father sighed. "Tessa, don't turn this into something. It was just a dinner." But it wasn't just a dinner. It was a milestone. It was cake and toasts and Margaret dancing with her grandkids while someone captured it all in warm lighting with a professional camera. It was family, her family, and she hadn't even been told it was happening. And yet she didn't scream, didn't cry. She just said, "Right, okay." Then she hung up. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum, like someone had opened the door to her childhood home and sucked the air out. That night, instead of calling her mother, instead of sending a carefully worded message or spiraling into confrontation, she went for a walk. The rain had let up, but everything still smelled like wet pavement and pine needle. Her boots carried her without direction, and she eventually found herself in front of The Shelf, a little bookstore on 9th Avenue. She hadn't been there in years, but it used to be her safe place. When things got too loud at home, when Claire screamed, or Margaret slammed doors, or Tessa herself made the mistake of talking back, she'd ride her bike here, tuck herself into the back corner with a book, and pretend the world didn't exist. Now, she walked in like she had never left. The smell was the same: paper, dust, coffee. She ran her fingers along the spines of poetry collections and journals, breathing slower for the first time all day. She snapped a photo. Nothing fancy, just the worn leather chair by the window and a glimpse of the familiar bookshelf labeled Healing and Rebirth. Then she posted it. The caption read, "Not all family days are celebrated with family. Some are spent in places where you are not forgotten." It wasn't even meant to be a message. It was just a truth she needed to say out loud. But people heard it anyway. An hour later, her phone started buzzing. First, it was her mother, calling twice in a row. Then, a text from Aunt Marilyn. Then, Claire. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Why would you post something like that on a public platform? It was Mom's night, Tessa. Why ruin it with your feelings? Your feelings. As though they were inconvenient. As though hurt had no place unless it was invisible. She picked up the third call finally. Her mother, hissing with restraint. "Do you want to explain what that post was about?" Tessa's voice was calm. "I want to know why I wasn't invited." There was a long, loaded pause. She could hear Margaret exhale, a breath heavy with years of judgment. "I didn't want drama," she said finally. "You always have an opinion. I wanted peace." There it was, the real reason. It wasn't about distance or schedule or logistics. It was that Tessa didn't play nice. She didn't nod and smile and swallow every bitter pill her family handed her. She challenged. She questioned. She spoke up when Margaret made cruel jokes disguised as advice. When Claire cut her off mid-sentence. When silence became the default language of their family. And they didn't want that at their picture-perfect party. They didn't want her. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She just said, "I no longer need a place where I'm feared instead of loved." Then she ended the call. And for the first time in her life, she didn't look back. The next morning, the backlash arrived like a wave. Cold, blaming, and carefully worded to sound like concern. Aunt Marilyn messaged her on Facebook, "You didn't have to make it public. You know how your mother gets. You've embarrassed her. Claire posted a vague quote to her story, something about people needing attention more than they need love. Tessa didn't need to be tagged to know who it was aimed at. And her father, he texted only once. You've made this into something ugly, Tess. We were trying to avoid exactly this kind of drama. They didn't apologize, not once, not even to pretend. Instead of owning their silence, their exclusion, their cruelty, they turned the spotlight on her reaction, called it theatrical, attention-seeking, disproportionate, as if being deliberately cut out of her own mother's milestone birthday was acceptable, as long as she kept quiet about it. But Tessa had reached her limit. For years, she had been the one who folded, who shrank, who smiled through clenched teeth and accepted the seat at the far end of the table. Or no seat at all, just to keep the peace. Not anymore. She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she opened her contacts list, deleted the family group thread, then each number one by one. She archived the photos, not out of sentiment, but as evidence. She blocked them on every platform. Then she went to the carrier's website and did what she'd wanted to do for years. Changed her number. No forwarding message, no digital breadcrumbs. She disappeared from their world like they had erased her from theirs. The silence that followed was different this time. Not the aching silence of abandonment, but the quiet peace of choosing herself. A space where she could finally breathe without waiting for someone to shame her for exhaling too loudly. It wasn't easy. Some nights, the anger clawed at her like a wild thing. Other nights, it was grief. Not for what she lost, but for what she never really had. A mother who wanted to understand her. A father who defended her. A sister who knew how to love without competition. But something else began to bloom in that silence. New people started to find her. Not the forced cheer of obligatory blood ties, but people who chose her. People who didn't see her voice as too much, her honesty as abrasive, her emotions as inconvenient. A woman from her co-working space invited her out for a poetry reading one Thursday. Tessa almost said no out of habit, but something tugged at her. Maybe the memory of how her mother once called poetry a waste of time. She went. She met Layla that night. A freelance editor with ink on her hands and too loud laughter. They talked about books, grief, family, how some wounds never scar but remain soft and glowing beneath the skin. Layla looked at her like she wasn't broken, like she was burnished. Then came Milo, who worked at the coffee shop where she escaped most mornings. He asked if she was a writer. She said no. He said, "That's a lie," and smiled like it wasn't an insult but an invitation. Then came Mira, who invited her to yoga and stayed after class when Tessa cried through Savasana, who didn't say, "You'll feel better soon," or "It's just your hormones." She just said, "That's a heavy kind of silence you've been carrying. I've carried that too." Tessa didn't become someone new. She became more herself. Without the constant noise of people trying to change her, she finally heard her own voice. Steady, flawed, radiant. The void her family left didn't stay empty for long, but it was no longer filled by performance, tolerance, or fragile people. It was filled with real, raw connection. People who didn't flinch when she was honest. People who didn't need her to shrink so they could feel tall. For the first few months, Tessa half expected someone to knock on her door. She'd imagine it during quiet evenings when the kettle boiled, her mother's voice, muffled by the door, pretending none of it had ever happened. Maybe her father, arms crossed, looking both ashamed and annoyed. Maybe Claire, trying to cry on cue. But no one came. The messages stopped. The calls couldn't get through. It was as if her silence had finally given them permission to let her go completely. That realization strangely didn't shatter her. It solidified her. They only loved the version of her that played along. Anything more honest, more wounded, more whole, was too much. So she left them to their curated gatherings, their matching sweaters and group selfies, subtle digs. She wasn't dead, but she had become a ghost to them, erased by her refusal to be small. And still, she kept going. She started going to a local writing group that met on Wednesdays above an old pub. The first night, she barely spoke, just listened. By the third week, she read a piece aloud about being the daughter who wasn't invited. No one gasped, no one laughed. Layla gripped her hand under the table. An older woman in the group whispered afterward, "My family did something similar. I never thought I'd hear someone say it out loud." Tessa smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. But healing isn't a straight line. It was at a grocery store of all places, beneath sterile, fluorescent lights and the smell of overripe bananas, that she saw someone she knew, her cousin Trevor. Pushing a cart, headphones in, looking older than she remembered, he saw her too. For a moment, there was recognition, then discomfort, and then worst of all, pity. "Tessa," he said, removing his earbuds like a kid caught doing something wrong. She offered a polite nod. "Trevor." He looked around as if someone might see them. "How have you been?" She shrugged. "Good." A beat. "You know, your mom's been really upset." There it was. the real reason he spoke. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Has she? She misses you, he said too quickly. I think she just didn't know how to reach out after everything. She's not good with conflict. Tessa bit her lip. She could have said so many things, like how Margaret had handled conflict just fine when it came to passive-aggressive jabs and cold shoulders, or how she'd managed to plan an entire party, book a string quartet, and invite 48 people, but not her daughter. Instead, she just asked, "Did she tell you to say this?" He flinched. Maybe. She doesn't know I saw you. Tessa nodded. Then let's keep it that way. She walked past him, left her cart behind, and went home without the pasta. That night, she wrote until her fingers cramped. About false reconciliation, about guilt dressed up as concern, about how some people only want you back once they realize they've lost control. And then she hit public. The piece went viral within a week. Not because it was sensational, but because it was true. Thousands of strangers wrote to her, "This is my story too. Thank you for saying the quiet part out loud." Even as her family pretended she didn't exist, the world was listening and believing her. The apartment felt different now, lighter. There were no more photos of family holidays, no more guilt-soaked keepsakes. She donated the dusty Christmas ornaments her mother had insisted she take when she moved out, tossed the old birthday cards with their performative "love you always" signature. She replaced them with things that mattered. Photos of her new people, Layla mid-laugh, Milo carrying too many books, Mira holding up a clumsy birthday cake she'd made just for Tessa. Not perfection, not obligation, just warmth. They celebrated her first birthday post-estrangement like it was a national holiday. There was a handmade crown, bad karaoke, a card that read, "You're not too much. You were just around people who wanted you to be less." She cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes before returning to the party. No one asked her to explain. No one got uncomfortable. Layla just handed her a glass of wine and said, "When you're ready." But peace doesn't erase the past. One morning, an email slipped through the filter. A new address, no subject line. From Claire. "I heard you're writing about us, about Mom, about what happened. I hope you're proud of yourself." Tessa stared at the words. Her heartbeat didn't spike. She didn't cry. She just sat there, calm, rooted, unshaken. Then she typed, "You erased me first. I just stopped pretending you didn't." She didn't send it. She didn't need to. Instead, she flagged the message as spam. That week, she hosted a small dinner, her own version of family night. There was no orchestra, no guest list politics, just mismatched dishes, candles and wine bottles, too many desserts. When someone asked if her family would ever reach out, if she'd ever make peace, she thought for a long time before answering. "I don't need a seat at a table that was built to keep me quiet. I'd rather build my own." And around her, that table was full. Laughter, understanding, no one trying to shrink her. It wasn't the family she was born into, it was better. The 1-year mark came without fanfare. No tears, no angry anniversary. Just a quiet morning, cool air coming through the window, and Tessa making pancakes in her kitchen, while Nora the cat circled her ankles. 1 year since the birthday party that rewrote everything, since the Instagram post, since she realized she was never really part of the family photo to begin with, just someone conveniently cropped in when needed. It had been a hard year, she wouldn't lie about that. The kind of year that peeled you down to bone and rebuilt you one boundary at a time. But it was also the year she started laughing again, sleeping deeply, speaking without second-guessing every word. That was worth remembering. So she decided to do something to honor it, not out of spite, not to make a point, but because it was her turn. She planned the whole thing slowly, intentionally. A dinner party in her little apartment, warm lights strung across the ceiling, a long table borrowed from Layla's friend. No speeches, no champagne tower, just people who knew how to love her without asking her to earn it. She sent the invites herself, handwritten, "Come as you are." No dress code, only kindness required. Layla came early and lit the candles. Milo brought wine and a bouquet of wildflowers. Mira showed up with a loaf of sourdough and her boyfriend in tow, both of them smiling like they were already home. Tessa wore a forest green wrap dress she'd bought for herself months ago. Soft, flattering, nothing like the stiff holiday attire her mother used to force on her. The food was imperfect and abundant. Roasted vegetables, 3 kinds of bread, pasta that stuck to the pot but tasted like memory. At one point, someone knocked over a glass and everyone shouted, "No stress," and clinked glasses anyway. It was loud, messy, real. It was everything those family gatherings never were. Near the end of the night, Layla stood up, holding her wine. "I just want to say something," she said, voice a little unsteady. "About Tessa." Tessa rolled her eyes, laughing. "Please don't make me cry in front of people." "No promises," Layla said. "Because this woman, she doesn't even know what she did for us. We didn't just find her. She pulled us in, made space. In a world full of performance, she's the most honest person I've ever met. Everyone nodded. You built this table, Tess, Mira added. You gave all of us a place to show up. Tessa felt her throat tighten, not with sadness, but something bigger, something like truth. She raised her glass. To being inconvenient, she said with a small, proud smile. To saying the thing you're not supposed to say. To walking away when staying quiet means disappearing. The toast echoed with clinks. They drank, and in that moment, she didn't feel alone. Not even alone. Later, after everyone left and the apartment hummed with leftover laughter and clattering dishes, Tessa sat by the window with Nora curled in her lap. Her phone buzzed once, a number she didn't recognize. No name attached. She stared at the screen, let it ring, then let it fade. No voicemail. She deleted the notification. There was nothing left to say. People sometimes talk about forgiveness like it's something you owe, like it's a gift you give even when it hasn't been earned. But Tessa learned something different. She learned that sometimes walking away is forgiveness, that letting go of rage doesn't mean letting go of the boundary. That peace can come not from pretending it didn't hurt, but from deciding it won't keep hurting you. She didn't need her mother to admit what she did. She didn't need her father to apologize. She didn't need Claire to soften. They could stay exactly who they were, and she would stay free. A few months later, her essay about chosen family was published in a national magazine. They paired it with a photo from that dinner party, candles flickering, people mid-laugh, a glimpse of her forest green dress in the corner. The headline read, "The table I built on losing one family and finding another." It went viral again. Strangers messaged her, "You gave me words I didn't have. I finally walked away after reading this. Thank you. I thought I was the only one." She wasn't. None of them were, and that was the whole point. It had been a year and a half since Tessa cut the cord. She sometimes wondered if anyone in her family still talked about her, whether her name came up at dinner tables, or if someone muttered, "Have you heard from Tessa?" Only to be met with shrugs and changed subject. She doubted it. What she didn't doubt anymore was her choice. There were still days where the silence felt heavy, where she passed someone who looked like her mother. Same posture, same walk, and something in her chest tensed instinctively. There were holidays where memory tried to sneak back in, offering softened versions of old wounds, tempting her to forget the sting. But forgetting wasn't healing. Remembering and choosing differently that was healing. By now, she had made a new life, thread by thread, woven with real laughter and shared vulnerability. Milo was living 2 floors above her now. They often met in the stairwell at odd hours, holding takeout or laundry, exchanging glances that meant, "I see you." Layla had turned into more than a friend. She was family, the kind who didn't share your blood but showed up when you were sick, remembered your favorite kind of tea, and knew when to push you to right the things that hurt. And Mira? Mira had become a kind of mirror, someone who reflected back the strength in Tessa she still didn't always see. They were her people. No blood ties, no inheritance, no drama, just truth. The essay that had gone viral opened doors. A podcast interview followed, then a short documentary piece. A book deal had been proposed, but Tessa hadn't said yes, not because she was afraid to tell her story, but because she was finally learning that her story wasn't just about pain anymore. She didn't want her family to be the defining line of her narrative. They were the starting line, yes, but not the whole race. She wrote about other things now, found families, boundaries, grief, self-parenting, joy, small joys, ordinary ones. Like the first time someone called her safe, or the way her breath felt deeper when she stopped apologizing before speaking. On the 2nd anniversary of the party that broke her, Tessa found herself at the bookstore. That bookstore, where she had first gone to mourn her erasure. She stepped into the quiet space, breathed in that familiar scent of old paper and wood polish, and made her way to the poetry section. Not to hide this time, but to honor the girl who once hid there. She ran her fingers over the spines until one thin blue volume caught her attention. She opened it at random. A single line on the page read, "And when she could no longer be part of their story, she became the author of her own." Tessa smiled, not the small, polite one, but the kind that starts in your bones. She bought the book, walked home in the rain without an umbrella, and didn't rush. That night, she wrote again. Not a letter, not a post, just a truth. I was not too sensitive. I was unprotected. I was not dramatic. I was aware. I was not difficult. I was unwilling to disappear. And finally, I was never the problem. I was just the first to say the truth out loud. She closed her journal, lit a candle, and sat with the silence. Not because it hurt,